At Psalm 68, verse 5, Jehovah is called a father of the fatherless. Are you a fatherless child? Or do you have a fatherless child or fatherless children in your congregation? You may be wondering, what do we mean by fatherless child? Well, in the context of our discussion, we're talking about young people who have only one believing parent in the truth. Now, that allows for a spectrum of possibilities. It could be a single-parent family. It could be a religiously divided family, and especially when the unbeliever is opposed. It could even include a situation where only one parent is actively serving Jehovah.
We're watching Seth Hyatt, who is a helper to the governing body's service committee, and this is significant. It's significant that he is a helper on this particular committee, as I'm going to come to. It's relevant to what he's telling us. But the title of his talk is Successful Fighters for the Faith, Those Being Raised by Single Parents. And he starts off by talking about fatherless children and quickly needs to define what he means by fatherless children. Does he mean literally fatherless children or children who have been orphaned? No. This has a specific meaning.
Well, in the context of our discussion, we're talking about young people who have only one believing parent in the truth.
So that's what we're talking about. There's only one parent who's able to indoctrinate the child into the cult. That's what this is about. It's not about whether someone is genuinely fatherless. It's not about whether the child is fatherless or not. It's about whether they only have one parent who's indoctrinating them into the Jehovah's Witness religion. And you can see why that would be a problem for Seth Hyatt. You can see why there would be an issue here if you are an organization or part of an organization that's in the business of exploiting children before they're able to develop critical thinking skills. If you're in the business of mass child indoctrination and a certain child only has one believing parent, even if they have both parents, oh no, there's only one of them that's going to indoctrinate them, we'd better make an entire talk on this subject. This is a potentially very undesirable situation from the point of view of child indoctrination. Let's devote an entire talk on our convention to dealing with this threat to our organization. We can't let pesky, unbelieving parents get in the way. We need to make sure these kids get indoctrinated as Jehovah's Witnesses, no matter what.
All of us, like Jehovah, need to appreciate the fatherless children in our congregations. We should view them as modern-day Timothys. In the year 65 CE, Paul was a prisoner in Rome, with no prospect of being released. In fact, his death was imminent. Time to write one more letter. To whom did he write? To Timothy, his beloved child in the faith. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. For I recall your unhypocritical faith, which dwelled first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, but which I am confident is also in you. Well, in a similar way, we can offer specific, sincere, heartfelt commendation to fatherless children and their parents, and commend them for what they're able to do. Include them in spiritual and recreational activities. When I was a boy, my grandmother used to pick me up every Saturday morning and take me in the ministry. I never had to wonder if she was coming, and I never had to wonder who I would work with. The book study conductor, an older brother, would always include my grandmother and me in the group with him and his wife. I cherish those memories.
Do you now, Seth Hyatt? Well, good for you. I'm glad that worked out well for you. But what you've just said is frankly reckless and irresponsible and highlights very straightforwardly how naive and blasé this organisation is when it comes to child protection. This material was so enraging when I was going over it the first time as part of the preparation for this rebuttal, because you must remember I am a core participant to the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse for England and Wales, basically an investigation back in my home country of the UK of the way child safeguarding is handled in various different institutions. And I am a core participant for the investigation that's looking into Jehovah's Witnesses. And I won't bore you with my thoughts on that whole investigation. I've made lots of videos about it and my various misadventures with Watchtower's service department with the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. But one of the things that came up in our investigation was that Jehovah's Witnesses were trying to argue every which way that they have no responsibility to implement child safeguarding measures. They shouldn't be held accountable for any problems or any issues surrounding child safeguarding, because according to them, they don't separate children from their parents, and they don't have any activities such as Sunday schools where children are separated from their parents and as part of congregation-sponsored activities, which is obviously nonsense. And in my evidence to the inquiry, and I think the same is true of the other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who were involved, in my evidence, I listed 4 ways in which the organisation does indeed give individuals access to children so that children are effectively separated from their parents, or at least may find themselves in a situation where they're alone with another congregant and their parent can't see what's happening. And those 4 areas were questions for baptism. And yes, in the organised book, it does suggest that parents should ideally be there, but there's wiggle room, even in the organised book, for situations where certainly an unbelieving parent wouldn't be there, and it certainly doesn't write off the idea of doing the questions anyway if the parents can't be there. So that's one area. Second of all, meetings for field service. This is just obvious, isn't it, really? We all know, or those of us who've been Jehovah's Witnesses know, what it's like to go to a meeting for field service as a child. You get assigned someone to work with, and frequently the brother or sister that you get assigned to work with isn't a family member, so that you end up going to the territory and going off down the street with this dude or with this lady who isn't even in your family. You're trusting them because they're a member of your congregation, and you're both involved in a congregation-sponsored activity. I mean, it's just obvious, isn't it? I don't know how you could even try and deny that this is a way in which children could be abused and have been abused. But guess what? Jehovah's Witnesses, the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, did deny that that was a way that children could be abused. Bible studies is another example. I can remember, as a ministerial servant in my congregation, being asked by the elders to go and study with kids in the congregation where one of the parents either wasn't a believer or they maybe weren't very active in the congregation. So that's a third way that children get separated from their parents. And also on my list, fourthly, was fatherless children, which is exactly what Seth Hyatt is talking about here. He's saying that if there are children in the congregation where one of the parents isn't a believer, it's basically a free-for-all, and everyone should consider it their responsibility to both encourage that child and involve them in spiritual and recreational activities?
Well, in a similar way, we can offer specific, sincere, heartfelt commendation to fatherless children and their parents, and commend them for what they're able to do. Include them in spiritual and recreational activities.
Include them in spiritual and recreational activities. Basically, a blanket invitation for everyone in the congregation to spend time with these fatherless children just because one of the parents might not be a Jehovah's Witness. And this is where I need to revisit the fact that Seth Hyatt is a helper to the service committee. It's the service committee that looks after the service department, and it's the service department of Watchtower that keeps the database. Seth Hyatt may seem all innocent, and he may come across as quite sincere and likable, at least compared to some of the other characters we need to put up with. But trust me, he is in on it. When you work in the service department or when you're on the service committee, you are knee-deep in the child sex abuse issues that Jehovah's Witnesses are facing at the moment. This man has first-hand involvement in the industrial scale cover-up of child abuse. So he knows, Seth Hyatt, how bad this problem is. He knows how many names are on that database, how many thousands of names are on that database. He knows how widespread child abuse is across the thousands of congregations in the United States alone. And here he is taking to the convention platform and giving a blanket invitation to associate with children, to spend time with children. He doesn't say whether it's with other people. He just says, include them in spiritual and recreational activities. That could be with other people, or it could be an adult alone with a child. As long as it's in the interests of the organization, as long as it's with the aim of strengthening the faith of this fatherless child, we'll overlook the countless ways this advice could go so badly and end up resulting in yet more children being abused and having their abuse covered up.